So we've been working with linear equations, and most recently we've been graphing linear equations that are written in standard form using the two intercepts. Today we're going to focus on writing linear equations, and the most famous form for a linear equation is what we call the slope-intercept form, and it is written as y equals mx plus b, where m is the slope and b is the y-intercept. Okay, so we've worked with m and b before. I'm just reminding you what those letters represent. Usually you'll see the m and the b written in a different color. So let's make those blue just so they stand out. Okay, so when you're working with a graph, it's pretty easy to pick out these two values. We've talked about this before, and I just want to remind you that the y-intercept is the place where your line hits the x-axis, and you can see right here that our b is at y equals 2. So we would say that b equals 2, and we've practiced picking those out before. To figure out what the slope is, you need to figure out the rise and the run. So you look for two places where your line crosses one of the intersections of the squares. So for instance, right here and then right here, and we'll draw in the rise and the run. So it looks like the rise here is about 2 and the run is about 1, and I would say that m equals 2 over 1, which is 2. Once you've picked out these two values, b is 2 and m is 2, you can write your linear equation. So our equation will be y equals, and then we write down the m, which we've said is 2, and then we write down x plus, and then we write down the b, which also happens to be 2. That's quite a coincidence there. And when you're asked to get the equation of a line in slope-intercept form from a graph, this is what you'd write for your response. The y-intercept is b, and the rise over run is m. Sometimes you'll be asked to write a linear equation, and you will be given the slope and the y-intercept. It's almost too good to be true. When you're given the slope, that's the m, and when you're given the y-intercept, that's the b. And so your response should simply be to write down the equation. Y equals m, which is 2, x plus b, which is 3. And that is your response for that problem. Similarly, down here we're given the slope, which is m, 7/4, and the y-intercept, which is b, so we'll write down that equation. Yes, these particular problems are as easy as I'm making it sound. You simply copy down the two numbers and put them in the right place. Don't worry, there's going to be some math, some calculating to do later here, but right now we're just reading and putting stuff in the right place. So when you're writing linear equations and you're given the slope and the y-intercept, you simply write y equals mx plus b and put the number in for m and the number in for b, just like we've done here. Those shouldn't be too bad. Things finally start to get interesting when you're simply given a point and the slope. And there are a couple of ways to attack these problems, but the one that we're going to use today is to start by looking at the slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b, and realizing that when you're given a point in the slope, you're actually not given the y-intercept. B is nowhere to be found. However, if you do a little algebra with this equation and solve for b, you can figure out how to calculate b. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to switch this equation around. I'm going to write it as b equals, I don't want to do that yet. I'm getting to the punchline too quickly. I'm going to write mx plus b equals y. Simply switch it around. Then you can use inverse operations to subtract mx from both sides, and you'll see that what we end up with is b equals y minus m times x. And what we'll be able to do is put a y number here, an m number here, and an x number here, and we'll be able to calculate b. Let me show you what I mean. We're given a point 3, 2. This number is an x number, the 3 is an x, the 2 is a y, and then we know that the slope is m. So I can write down a value for b, even though they don't give it to me. I simply do b equals the y number, which is 2, minus the m number, which is -1, times the b number, times the x number, which is 3. 2 minus -1 times 3. Following the order of operations, this is 2 plus 3, which is 5. So the y-intercept of b is 5. And we know the slope is -1, so I can write my equation. Y equals m, which is -1, x plus b, which is 5. So for these problems, I need to use this little equation here that tells me that b is y minus mx. b is y minus mx. Let's try that again with this problem down here. First of all, let me remind you that the first number here is x, this one's y, and this one's m. We can figure out what b is by doing y minus mx. So that's going to be 2 minus -3/4 times -3. That's going to be a fraction, but we're not going to panic. It's going to be 2 plus 9/4. Well, 2 is 8/4, and 8/4 plus 9/4 is 17/4. So that equals 17/4. If you're freaking out about 17/4, you can put 4.25 if you do it on your calculator. Okay, so I'm ready to write the equation. We're going to write y equals mx plus b. So we write y equals, m is already written down, and that is -3/4. It's right here. And b we just figured out is 17/4, so I'm going to put y equals mx plus, and then b we said was 17/4. So I'm just going to leave it as a fraction. Again, I could also write 4.25, but that's okay. Don't have to. So there is my equation. One more time. Before we can write in the m and the b, we need to know what b is. So we're going to use this equation. b equals y minus mx. Y minus m times x. We pick out the x, y, and the m, and then we write down b equals y minus mx. That's what I did in both these cases. Once you have b, you can fill in y equals mx plus b because you're given m. So these are a little more complicated because you have to use this equation, b equals y minus mx, before you could write out the equation. The most complicated situation is when you're asked to write linear equations given just 2 points. But we can also do these. We just have to remember 2 formulas. The first one is that to get slope, which is m, we need to do y2 minus y1, the change in y over the change in x, divided by x2 minus x1. We've done that before. Delta y divided by delta x. That's the formula for slope. And then we just talked about how to get b. b is y minus mx. Now since we have 2 y's and 2 x's, you can just pick the first one, or really the easiest one, but we'll say y1 and x1. You don't have to use both pairs. You just pick one of the pairs. So we'll just say we'll use y1 and x1. So we'll do m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, which we've practiced before to get the slope. And we'll do this new formula, b equals y1 minus mx1 to get the y-intercept, and then we'll write the equation. Let's practice this. So first we'll get the slope equation, which is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So I need to label these. This is x1, y1. Remember, x and y go together. And this is x2 and y2. X and y go together. The equation would then be y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Negative 5 minus 1 is negative 6. And 0 minus 2 is negative 2. That works out to be a 3. So my slope m is 3. That's good news. Now we can get b. To get b, we do y1, which we said was 1, minus m, which is 3, times x1, which is 2. This is 1 minus 6, which is negative 5. So the b is negative 5. Once you have m and b, you're ready to write your equation. Y equals m x plus b. Now when b is negative, you can actually just write the minus sign. So I'm going to write minus 5. Y equals 3x minus 5. That is the slope-intercept form for the equation of a line that goes through 2, 1 and 0, negative 5. If you do the graph of these, the line that goes through these points, it would have a slope of 3 and it would cross at negative 5. Now let me show you a little shortcut here. If you're clever, you'll realize that we should have already known b was negative 5 because the coordinates of any y-intercept are 0, b. 0, whatever the y-intercept is. And we're given this point 0, negative 5 right here. So if you're paying attention and you have a point that starts with 0, you know that that other point is b. You'll notice in my second example here, this is just an odd coincidence that this is already the y-intercept, negative 5 again. I'm going to run through the calculation because you're not always that lucky. But keep in mind that if you see it, you can write down b right away. Unfortunately, the slope's not hiding in there. We're going to have to calculate that. So let's go ahead and do that for the second. We're looking through the equation. We're looking for the equation of a line that happens to run through negative 5, 3 and 0, negative 5. As always, we label x1 and y1 and x2 and y2. That's where those values are going to come from. That's a y2. So m is going to be negative 5 minus 3 over 0 minus negative 5. Now this one is not going to work out to be an integer, and that's okay. Sometimes slope is a fraction, right? It's rise over run. This one is negative 8 over 5. If you prefer a decimal, I can probably figure this out. This is 1 and 3/5, that's negative 1.6. So if you want the decimal, you can use negative 1.6. I'm going to stick with a fraction though. So my slope is negative 8/5. We already know what b is going to equal, but let's write it in anyway. The calculation for b is, according to what we wrote at the top, y1, which is 3, minus 8/5, negative 8/5, times x1, which is negative 5. Now we're not going to panic here because we know when we multiply a fraction where the denominator is multiplied by that same whole number, these cross out. We also know that a negative times a negative is a positive. So this turns out to be 3 minus 8. And I think you'll agree that 3 minus 8 is in fact negative 5, which is what we thought it would be. So that's good news that it worked out to be exactly what it was supposed to be. But just keep in mind you may have to go through that calculation. Now we're ready to write out the slope-intercept form. We already know what m is. It's -8/5. And we know b is -5. So here we go. Y equals -8/5, which is also -1.6, x, and then remember, write -5 there when b is negative instead of writing plus -5. That's the slope-intercept form for the point that goes, or the line that goes through these 2 points. I keep saying points. Okay, we went through 4 different ways you may be asked to write the equation of a line that happens to go through some given points or taken from a graph. In the first slide we saw a graph, and the second slide we just served you up with the slope and the y-intercept. On the third slide we gave you a point and the y-intercept, and in this last situation we just give you 2 points. And in each case you can go through the process of finding m and b and filling in the slope-intercept form. I really could have called this video, "Here's how you find m and b." Got some thunder rolling in the background, so that's my cue to wrap this video up. Good luck with your work.